Today's AskReddit post. What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event. Oh boy, this is gonna be a good one. Let's get started. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of two joining thunderstorms and was lifted to an altitude of 33,000 feet. She landed over 3 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. That sounds scary. Imagine spending 3 hours in the sky and not being able to get back down. She was unconscious for most of it, thankfully. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919. A tank filled with 2 gallons of molasses burst and sent a tidal wave of molasses through the streets of Boston. 21 people were killed. Imagine standing in the streets as a tidal wave of molasses approaches and just thinking to yourself, well, I guess this is how it ends. Death by molasses. Jeanne de Clisson, 1300 to 1359, was married to a French nobleman who was beheaded for treason by the French king. Enraged, she sold their estate and purchased 3 black warships with red sails, and became a pirate queen of the English Channel who targeted French ships. She became known as the Lioness of Brittany, and in her 13 years of piracy she would slaughter every member of a ship's crew except for one so that last survivor could go back and tell the French king what had happened. Why do I feel like the 1300s never get talked about? They focus on the Black Plague. Everything else gets lost by the wayside because that was so massive. An English king named Ethelred, later called the Unready, took some troops to defend against a Viking invasion. The weather was bad, so a lot of the Vikings' ships crashed as they were landing. Ethelred thought that it would be dishonorable to attack them as they were stumbling onto shore, so he kept his troops back until the Vikings had a chance to get together and form proper battle lines before he attacked them. The better prepared Vikings then won the fight and slaughtered a bunch of Ethelred's men, and he and the rest were forced to run away while the Vikings went around pillaging. Also, his sobriquet does not mean unready in the modern sense, as in unprepared, but rather ill-advised. Ethelred, the name meaning well-advised, a hilarious pun. Mad Jack Churchill, the man with the only confirmed longbow kill in World War II. Guy and his squad did a death march towards the Germans while playing bagpipes, got captured and sent to a concentration camp. He then escaped, got caught again, and then escaped a different concentration camp. Also, he always carried a Scottish longsword with him. There's so much other weird poop he did after the war, and it's amazing to me that he's entirely real. Louis XIX was king of France for 20 minutes. The shortest war ever recorded was around 40 minutes long. During the Salem witch trials, dogs were also accused of witchcraft. 2 dogs were executed because of it. Was the 40 minutes war between the British and natives of the island of Zanzibar? Yes, it's clocked at between 38-45 minutes. The dancing plague of 1518. It wasn't even an isolated incident. Multiple dancing plagues happened over the course of a few centuries. Strasbourg in 1518 was just one of the bigger ones. It's mass hysteria. So many interesting cases, like nuns meowing at each other. Find it on Wiki. It is a real thing. Not exactly historical, but a poodle named Cachi, in Caballito, Buenos Aires, fell from 13 floors and fatally hit 75-year-old Marta Espina, killing both instantly. In the course of the events, 46-year-old Edith Sola, who came to see the incident, was fatally hit by a bus. An unidentified man, who witnessed Edith's death, had a heart attack and also died. On his way to the hospital, Edith Sola, who came to see the incident, was fatally hit by a bus. Did this woman have fortune-telling powers and just use it to witness hilarious deaths? Obviously not. Or she would have been able to avoid her own. The escape from Antarctica by the members of the Antarctic expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. The stuff they went through was unbelievable. Their boat, the Endurance, was crushed by ice floes. They were stranded on the floes for over a year in temperatures well below freezing. They then took to 3 boats around 22 feet in length across the Antarctic Ocean looking for land. There were about 10 men in each boat. They missed reaching land by just a few miles at times. 2/3 of them got stranded on Elephant Island surrounded by ice while one of the boats went out in search of rescue. That boat made it through the Drake Passage, one of the deadliest places in the ocean. All but 3 of them got stranded with little food and water while the 3 men who left became the first people to cross South Georgia on foot. They found civilization, rescued the men who came through the Drake Passage, waited months until they could rescue those on Elephant Island. Every single person who came on the initial voyage survived, with the worst lasting consequence being a single foot amputation. I am shocked that this has not been made into a major movie or mini-series. The CIA was researching psychic abilities for 30 years as a way to spy on the USSR. After 30 years, the program was terminated, and their conclusion was that psychic powers probably don't exist. The Men Who Stare at Goats. The opening of that film will stick with me forever. More of this is true than you would believe is just so eloquent in its simplicity. A Russian Tsar had a bomb thrown at him, avoided it, and thought it was a good idea to stay there to look at the damage. Enter second guy with bomb. Assuming you mean Alexander III, Lenin himself watched the execution of his brother in a slightly earlier assassination attempt. When you learn just how poorly planned that assassination was, it's amazing to think that one of the most brilliant political and economic minds of the last century is related to one of the bumbucks who tried to kill Alexander III. Spartan weddings. Basically, young Spartans were trained for years in camps, surrounded only by men. So, when the time came for marriage, the women would shave their heads and dress in men's clothing, since the idea of having intercourse with anyone other than a man weirded out the grooms. I don't know, man, sounds a little gay to me. A lot of gay actually. 21 Sikh soldiers fought against 10,000 Afghan intruders and won. It is known as the War of Saragarhi. Yeah, the movie Kesari is about that, and it's fantastic. Salute to those brave men. Though they shouldn't have died for a colonial cause, but they actually didn't win. They did hold off the massive Afghan army for an entire day, nullifying their surprise attack and allowing the British Indian Army to gather forces and counterattack, preventing the Afghans from taking their actual strategic objectives. The forts in the area, the fort the Sikhs were in, was actually just a communications node between the forts, which was why it was so lightly manned. I don't know if this counts as a historical event, because it happened in 2010, but the owner of the Segway company, Jimmy Heselden, died by driving a Segway off a cliff near his estate in Yorkshire. Edit. Thank you all who corrected me on the demonstration part. At least we're 100% certain he's not a witch. In 1985, Philadelphia police bombed a residential neighborhood. The resulting explosion destroyed 2 city blocks, killing 5 children and 6 adults. I watched that fire from my house just outside of West Philly. I'm shocked at how many people have no knowledge of the 5th largest city dropping a bomb on itself that resulted in the deaths of 11 citizens and the destruction of 61 houses. Sergeant Stubby. During World War I, a soldier found a stray dog when training on the Yale University campus, and took a liking to him. The soldier snuck the dog onto the ship when he had to leave campus, and when the dog was found by the commanding officer, he was allowed to stay because he had learned how to salute. Stubby was injured a few times during the war, but he was useful with alerting his squad of surprise mustard gas attacks and gunshots before the human ear could detect the sound. He also found and comforted wounded soldiers and caught a German soldier by the leg of his pants until American soldiers got to him. AKA, the bestest boy to ever live. Reminds me of the Polish bear who fought in World War II and was promoted to corporal. Joshua Norton was just this random crazy guy from San Francisco who hated all this political nonsense that was going on at the time and figured he could do the job better at it himself. And thus the Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico was born. While he held no real power, the people liked him so much that they treated him like royalty anyways. Any currency issued under his name was treated like real money at many establishments. One day, he was arrested by a private security force because of his mental health. which enraged practically all of San Francisco. The police chief let him go because he had committed no crime, and Norton gave an imperial pardon to the guy who arrested him. After this incident, any police officer Norton passed would salute him. Another time, when a riot had formed and was getting pretty violent, Norton simply stood in front of the mob and calmly prayed, which managed to disperse the mob, and that's not even a fraction of the crazy stuff that he did. President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845. His pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing loudly. That is extremely on brand for Andrew Jackson. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel in 1838 in which 4 shipwreck survivors, at the point of starvation, chose to resort to cannibalism. So they killed the young cabin boy, Richard Parker, and eat him. In 1884, a ship called the Mignonette sank. 4 crew members survived. At the point of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest of them, Richard Parker, the inspiration for the tiger's name in Life of Pi. I died laughing when I heard the actor that played the older Pi in Life of Pi said the name Richard Parker, Spider-Man's dad's name, in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's not historical, but I doubt you'll believe me without a link. It was like 20 years ago. In my town there was a shooting accident that was pretty crazy. This woman was practicing with her husband's rifle out in the field or something, and she got a shot off which made its way to the highway and struck a motorist in the head, killing them. The driver was the shooter's twin sister, who was separated at birth. She lived like 300 miles away and was literally just passing the town to go someplace else when she was killed by a stray bullet from the sister she never knew she had. That's still like the craziest coincidence I've ever heard of. Any link then? There are 3 separate defenestrations of Prague. The word defenestration was coined to describe the third one. The defenestrated parties survived in the third one. The Catholics claimed angels helped them down. The Protestants claimed they landed on a dung heap. Historians think they survived because they were only on the 2nd floor. To this day, political protests in Prague often involve defenestrating someone in effigy. In the Middle Ages, gays and lesbians would become nuns and monks to avoid persecution. And since religion was a heavy influence in those days, it was seen as noble that they were dedicating themselves to God. They would have special friends, and since no one could get pregnant, it wasn't that big of an issue. That's still going on. I've heard that a lot of gays hook up at conversion therapy camps. Start of World War I. Doomsday cult assassination gone wrong until the driver takes a wrong turn, allowing it to go right again. Sets of armed conflict between 2 countries, but those 2 countries have allies, and those allies have allies. And soon Europe is engulfed in war with countries from around the world participating in what was called at the time the Great War, or the war to end all wars. But in reality it was only an appetizer to the all-out destruction and human brutality of World War II. The Great Emu Wars of Australia. Not to mention, the birds won. They won against the army but got ducking massacred when the government started paying for their heads. The East German balloon escape. In 1979, 2 families escaped East Germany to West Germany by a homemade hot air balloon. Edited for redundancy. There's a couple great escapes, like when the border was still new and some geniuses got past by lowering a convertible until it was shorter than the gate's arm, and just gunned it through the checkpoint. Wojtek was a bear who fought Nazis in return for cigarettes and beer. He didn't die until 20 years after World War II. Wojtek fought the Nazis for free. The beer and cigs were just a bonus. Harold Holt, the PM of Australia, went for a swim in the ocean in 1967 and was never seen again. The fact that Ohio and Michigan had a civil war, knowing people from both states, I'm not entirely sure that ever ended. 2020. I'm waiting for the movie 2020, The Gift That Kept Giving, the musical. I feel the only way you could possibly tell the story of this year is through a musical. most of the random fictional sounding events in the world can be found on YouTube with Salmonella Academy. The videos are hilarious and just shows how ridiculous some people were. Plus the videos are relatively short and you stay interested till the end. Bulgarian swineherd. King Ivalo the swineherd became a king and won a battle against the trained army of the current king of that time. Dr. Robert Liston performed an operation that ended up with a 300% mortality rate. He was amputating a leg of a patient. During this he sliced off the fingers of her assistant. They both died of infection. He also slashed the coattails of a spectator, who was so terrified that the knife pierced his vital organs that he died from fright. 9 Italian geologists being charged with manslaughter for not predicting an earthquake. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war against Neptune, god of the ocean. He led his soldiers to a beach and instructed them to stab the water. Considering what else he did, this is wholesome. The Christmas truce of 1914 in World War I. In 1971, a teenage girl named Julianne Koch was on a plane that was struck by lightning and disintegrated in the air. She plummeted 3,000 meters strapped to her seat and landed in the Amazon rainforest. Her mom had been on the flight with her, and she searched in vain for her, only to learn that she was the sole survivor of the crash. She survived 11 days alone, treating her maggot-infested wounds with fuel and using tracking techniques her father had taught her, before she found a boat that she used to make her way back to civilization. What an absolute legend. My grandpa had his balls chopped off, but he managed to sew it together. Buddy, you can't just leave that there and wander off about your day. Tell us more about the man with the cleaved ball sack. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. The beginning felt like a movie. Terrible movie. 0 stars. The Soviet scientists starving to death saving the seed bank of Leningrad during Hitler's invasion in the winter of 1941 to 1942 despite it being full of corn, wheat and potatoes. A psychopath from a reality show ending up in the Oval Office. The entire life of Julie d'Aubigny, behind her cordial swordmaster, heartthrob turned opera singer who lived her life entirely for the lols. Beat the poop out of dudes in sword duels, and doing it topless whenever anyone doubted she was a lady. Got in trouble for making out with ladies at royal balls. Once became a nun to duck a nun and then set fire to the convent. Shit is so wild. It's insane there's not a blockbuster movie about her. The Attack of the Dead Men during World War I. Auschwitz, then and again. Attack of the Dead 100 Men. The Canadian government starved indigenous people to death just to scientifically determine how long it took people to starve to death. Google Newfoundland flour mix. In July 1518, residents of the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, were struck by a sudden and seemingly uncontrollable urge to dance. The hysteria kicked off when a woman known as Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to silently twist, twirl and shake. She kept up her solo dance-a-ton for nearly a week, and before long, some 36 other Strasbourgians had joined in. By August, the dancing epidemic had claimed as many as 400 victims. The strange episode didn't end until September, when the dancers were whisked away to a mountaintop shrine to pray for absolution. The funny thing is that there is not really an explanation for what happened. Explanations range from medical issues known as hot blood, to curses being placed on people. Due to a military standoff that took years, 15 ships became stranded in an inland sea, and over 8 years formed a multinational ship-based society that even included its own currency. The real-life army of giants. It happened in Prussia. The king who made it was a pervert and a freak. In 1518, there was a mystery plague that caused people to dance to their deaths, and in 1278, and in 1374, and other incidents until the mid-17th century. Not only did this mystery plague happen, it happened multiple times, in multiple places, across centuries. Pepsi becoming a military superpower for a while. Whoa, you actually watched the whole video. I'd give you a high five if I was a human. Make sure to click the like button and subscribe for more great content. See you next time.